Saturn Dave here from Sega Saturn SHIRO, and today we're pulling from the SHIRO archive an interview with Dr. Eric Ameres of the Duck Corporation, creators of the TrueMotion video codec used on the 3DO, the Saturn, Dreamcast, PC, and subsequent platforms. This interview was pulled from December 18th, 2019, Season 4, Episode 3, DuckTales, with Dr. Eric Ameres. The SHIROs that conducted this interview were Kay Kona, Patrick Traynor, and Peter Malik. This interview has been uploaded for archival purposes and may be used with permission. We hope you enjoy.
Thank you so much for joining us today and having this conversation.
My pleasure.
We're going to start off with asking you a question. Not a lot of our audience is actually going to be aware of who you are or what your role related to the Saturn was. So I'd like to have you introduce yourself and just give our listeners a little bit of background about you and your history with the Saturn.
I was a software engineer for the Duck Corporation at the time, back in the 90s. And I joined that company specifically because I had a lot of experience in sort of real-time and kind of performance-oriented programming and assembly language and, working with that sort of those sorts of applications. And what we did, our job as Duck was really, it's tough because our job was to be as invisible as possible. We did basically FMV or video compression for a lot of the games. We made tools available that developers could choose to use to include everything from like a full motion video cut sequence or integrating graphics that they needed to compress one way or another in the game. And we did the same for both video and for audio. I joined shortly after the company had started working with Sega, and they were kind of working out the details of what the relationship would be. And I was lucky enough to kind of become the primary person working on the Saturn and eventually the Dreamcast as well. So that's my real short story of how it all got kicked off. And I became really, really great friends with a lot of the folks at SOJ, Sega of Japan, Sega of America. For a while there, I was probably visiting Tokyo ballpark, once a month sort of thing, leading up to, launches and particular titles and things. Went to a lot of different Sega conferences, talking to people about how to use the tools and how to integrate in there. But yeah, it's a tough job in that you had to be as invisible as possible. That's the nice thing, or it's supposed to be the nice thing about video compression. When it works well, you don't notice it.
I think really that's the best thing you can say just about programming in general. You just got to be invisible as possible to make sure the consumer has the best end product at the end of the day, right?
Yeah. The last thing you want them doing is noticing you. Then they have something to complain about.
Eric, I don't know if there is such a thing, but did you have, a standard day at Duck Corporation? Like, what did that look like? Or was it just sort of all over the map depending on what was going on?
Well, it was definitely all over the map. Interesting thing about working at Duck at the time, we were a very, very small company, handful of people, I want to say 6, maybe 8 of us. And the one thing that happened when I joined, I was the one who didn't want to move to Manhattan. The main office of Duck was actually in the Tribeca Film Center building. The landlord was Robert De Niro. It's kind of a fun story. And I still live upstate, about 2 hours away from the main office there. So I didn't want to go down there, or I'm happy to go down there. I actually grew up in Queens, but I lived up here in the Albany, New York area. So I would shuttle back and forth, taking the train or driving. So I guess it was more week by week than day by day. And, I'd go down there for a couple of days each week, drive down middle of the night or middle of the morning and, sleep on the couch and do all that kind of stuff, especially, around deadlines and so on. But we were definitely a small company and trying to innovate rather quickly. And then eventually, as we worked more and more with Sega of Japan, especially, everything became sort of round the clock kind of thing, because I'd be getting conference calls and on the phone all the time, literally all the time. So it was incredibly hectic. but incredibly fun and just, great working with all kinds of people around the world on different things. It's a good time to be in video games.
Who were the first game-oriented companies that approached you to use TrueMotion?
Well, outside, we actually, before working with Sega, we got our start largely we'd done some stuff for Intel, kind of showing off early MMX and early processors, and there are a couple of different companies there, but we probably made the biggest early splash for ourselves offering TrueMotion for the 3DO game system. And that kind of proved we had some credibility. And we actually, in one game, which we might talk a little bit about later, because it did show up on the Saturn, got best looking video on that platform in its early days, and that kind of got us a good start on stuff. So from there, once we were with Sega, then of course developing tools with them, that opened the doors to lots and lots of Sega developers, and a lot of people were doing cross-platform things as well. So we started working across a lot of platforms, a lot of different things.
So did you sort of work with 3DO and a lot of the PC stuff at the same time, or was it you're mainly on the PC, then moved over to 3DO, or worked on simultaneously?
Well, 3DO was actually pretty early on. I personally didn't work on the 3DO, so that was sort of limited. We kind of moved on from 3DO pretty quickly. We continued to support the PC for quite a while, but my main platform personally was actually the Saturn, and eventually then the Dreamcast, and then all the tools on the PC that sort of supported that. And then a lot of we learned a lot of things about doing compression on there that then eventually kind of backfilled into other platforms. And we tried to also maintain kind of standard interfaces and standard libraries and things. So if someone developed a game on the Saturn, they could easily port at least our pieces of it to other platforms as well. Like you saw, I don't know if you're familiar with Enemy Zero. That was a good example of a game that it was done on the Saturn and then eventually got ported over to the PC. So that was a good example of that, I think.
Was it hard to sort of port the codec and engine over to different consoles, or between Saturn and PC, or was it seamless in a way?
From an interface point of view, it's pretty straightforward. From a performance and coding point of view, we had a lot of work to do. Obviously, the platforms back then were not nearly as fast and processor capable as things are today. Gigahertz back then, as opposed to gigahertz. So we spent a lot of time optimizing code. I spent the better portion of my time continually optimizing for the SH2. Taking advantage of like parallel processing on the Saturn and so on. So there's lots of stuff that we had to do that hopefully made it seamless for developers. They would just say, "Oh, decompress a frame of video," and not have to worry about all the performance stuff underneath. But that's the part we had worried about.
So speaking on that, what sort of were the typical ratios of compressions that you guys achieved during the day in the Saturn using TrueMotion versus other codecs in its day? So, I mean, you messed with a lot of different material and things to get that down to that level.
Compression ratios. That's a good question. At the end of the day, the way what it really came down to is we knew we had a specific amount of data that we could stream off the CD. There's a specific speed we could do it because it was basically a 2x CD at that time. So in 300 kilobytes per second, how good could we make it look? So it just became finding the right settings and getting it to be at that bit rate. By today's standards, it was not nearly as compressed. Looking at even the stuff. I guess a good side note: the On2 Technologies, the compression. If you're watching YouTube these days, or maybe even Hulu, or a lot of things, they're all WebM is a descendant of the compression technology in many ways that we had then and so on, and they're obviously way more capable now. But then it was kilobytes per second, not kilobits per second. It was more we were focused about making sure that the quality was there, and offering the best tools and stuff for developers. So it was 2x data rates was just what we were going by. Best quality at 2x CD data rates.
I gotcha. And what sort of file formats were they working with in that time? Was it using basically just doing direct transfers to film prints or something of that nature, or some art cells and doing it all digitally? Or was it all done digitally, specifically animation wise?
By the time we got it, usually it had already been digitized and or had been done, on we just received files. Sometimes we would receive like a beta SP tape or some kind of high quality, usually just for the live stuff that had been shot live. Typically we were getting hard disk FedExed or something from somewhere. Based on the quality and the cleanness of things, I'm going to say most of what I would see would have already been done digitally on a workstation and rendered from there, or drawn on there. There were definitely some things, and a lot of test things. I remember some Sonic test files, which were certainly hand drawn animation, and they were hand shaded and kind of this beautiful stuff. I think I put some of the stuff up there. You might be able to find it on YouTube. So it's a variety of things, but they were always most companies were always pushing to try to get us the best quality formats available that they could, whatever depended on the project. But it's always, even though we're compressing it down to incredibly low resolutions and whatnot, it's always about garbage in, garbage out sort of thing. So you want to get the best quality stuff in the first place.
Yeah, you'd rather downscale than upscale, then, right?
Yeah. And it's fun because I have, every so often I'll be looking through because I'm a pack rat about these things, and I have unearthed a few really, really pristine original renders and stuff and put them up somewhere, and people are like, wow, that's the game never looked that good. I'm like, you're absolutely right, because this is like the artist version, as they delivered it to the programmers. And so that's really fun every so often, encountering a little bit of history like that.
Makes me wonder if they have it laying around somewhere where if they do a remake, they can just take that high quality file and just place that in there and use newer compression algorithms to get that as high quality as possible.
Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. There definitely have been cases where assets have been lost and they you can't go back and you can't replicate things. It's kind of a tragedy of the digital era. It becomes really easy to generate stuff, but it also becomes very easy to lose stuff. Which is unfortunate. Actually, just recently been working a lot. I'm working at an art center right now. I've been there for the better part of, a dozen years now. And one of the projects I'm working on right now is digital archiving. And we have this massive library of all sorts of performances and work that we've done, and trying to properly archive it so that, 50 years from now, someone will, still be able to see all of it in the generally good looking formats. So it always remains the case. If
digital archiving,
try to preserve it.
Something that's right up your alley, Kay.
So, Eric, tell us, when did you move on from On2 / the Duck Corporation?
Ooh, that was in 2007. Actually, I left On2 at the time, and I decided, basically, I'd sort of been in my CTO role, my management role for quite a while, and I left to kind of rejoin basically my alma mater. My college was opening this arts center, the Experimental Media and Performing Arts Center. And I was lucky enough to kind of join the project kind of early on as the senior research engineer and get back into the trenches. I'm definitely more, I like being kind of where the rubber hits the road sort of thing. And I guess I just sort of tired of management sort of stuff, as opposed to having my hands as much in the code as possible. And, so it made sense to kind of do that at the time. That's kind of what happened.
Do you have any plans on taking older development platforms that you've worked on in the past and showing them to your students, like taking the Saturn development system that you have and showing them what it was like to program this?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, there's lots of things to be gained by learning from the past. Sometimes it's easy to overlook some kind of technology or to downplay the importance of history. Unfortunately, not my original, the big systems that were the size of, the original prototypes for the Saturn were behemoths. They were the size of like a microwave oven, a big microwave oven. Yes. Unfortunately, you're going to cry when I say this, but I think they got rid of them after I left. And I think they just literally pushed them off the loading dock into a dumpster kind of thing. Yeah, right. It's like, wish I should have taken them. I really, really should have taken them. But that was, I was like, what happened? Oh, we got rid of all this. Oh, no. But thankfully, I held on to, my core development system. And it does boot up, and it's really great to see. And I still have my CD emulators and whatnot that work on there. Yeah, students love to see that sort of thing as well, and it's curiosity and retro gaming and nostalgia gaming is very much alive and well. And the stuff that happened then is impacting what's being developed now, and the styles, the formats, the looks, the gameplay. It's not just about all the newest technology. It's there've been a lot of great games made over time, so it's lots of good stuff to refer to and look at. But yeah, I'm excited to actually put that on the shelf. I have to bring in of course have to bring in a CRT, which is going to be fun. I think I would keep my big 27-inch Sony at home so I can still play House of the Dead with the with my light gun, but I have to bring at least like a 13-inch CRT so they can experience it.
I think I saw on your YouTube channel with your PVM in the background there and the that piece in that video, right?
Yeah.
That gorgeous PVM.
Yeah, no, that's a big thing. All the guys in the community nowadays clamor for is the Sony PVM monitors. They're hunting them down. I saw some posts locally of people like, oh, hey, anybody have any PVM monitors lying around?
My other this Panasonic, which might even be nicer, and that's actually out in my shop at the moment. I gotta make sure that's still doing okay. It's a worry because now, of course, there's as old as they are, you got to worry about the capacitors going bad and all that kind of stuff. So they definitely need some care, and a lot of people will go and recap them and do all sorts of things to keep them running.
TrueMotion was pretty much the epitome of what Duck was providing to Sega and the gaming industry at large during your time period there. What impact has TrueMotion had outside of the gaming industry? You mentioned a little bit about this before, but if you can go into depth about it.
Sure. Well, TrueMotion in many ways, I guess the name has sort of fizzled out a little bit. I mean, but it is certainly the ancestor. Shortly after I left in 2010, I think now. I left in 2007. So On2 was purchased by Google. So it became the TrueMotion stuff, which had then become, after TM2 and TrueMotion 2X, there became VP3, which is sort of a renaming of TrueMotion, and also it incorporated a lot of new technologies. We had acquired another company, and kind of shifted to some frequency domain based compression stuff, and but still kept a lot of our core stuff in there, and it continued to evolve and so on, and that's become WebM and the new advanced. It's not the H.264 advanced media codec, but what's the latest name? It's been changing a couple of times now, but the open codec that Google and a lot of different companies are working on is a descendant of TrueMotion. And I know at Google, a lot of the folks who were at On2 and actually had done various versions of even some of the TrueMotion stuff, some of the compression tools back in the day are still working diligently on the latest technologies out there. So a lot of people are actually using descendants of those codecs today, more so than back then. So there's billions of them out there now, as opposed to millions. So.
I know that a lot of the TrueMotion stuff back in the day were really used on CRTs. I was curious, when you guys were developing the codec, was there any thought of going to LCD? And I was just curious if with the LCD, if you guys thought, oh, maybe we should future-proof this for LCD, or you had any LCD testing rigs that you worked on.
There were things we did, and we took advantage of on CRTs to kind of disguise certain types of artifacts and things in pleasing ways, and the ways you would notice, in terms of, people are used to, scan lines and so on. So a lot of the time when we were doing and blurriness between scan lines, so we had some special modes if you needed, extra compression. There's this famous mode that we referred to in-house as Fat Freddy mode, which there's a game called Fox Hunt. I think it only came out, it might have been just a PC game early on, I forget now. And it was all FMV, and they needed just so much compression going on. So we would do this, we offered this mode where it was like a 3/2, 2/3 sort of like squished horizontally, because of, you could kind of count on a certain amount of smearing across the horizontal scan lines, as opposed to, trying to keep things crisp across scan lines. So we played games with that. And there was a lot of things that we also did early on inside of our algorithms specific in terms of how we chose basically the delta sets. You know, it was all, I guess now you can find out all this stuff since it's all been published and patents have you know, we did a lot of stuff with basically sort of a two-dimensional delta coding at the time. And by choosing very carefully how you did that delta coding, you could introduce artifacts or keep your artifacts looking very natural. Like we were very famous for having sort of a very film grain kind of texture. So our artifacts had a generally pleasing texture, especially if you looked at like, you know, sketches or anime, hand-drawn anime and so on. We could kind of tune our settings to kind of hide the artifacts in ways that were kind of that fit the artistic intent of the video itself. Like we had, you know, a set that would work better for live video and a set that would work better for hand-drawn animation or flat animation or things like that. Let's see. We didn't really worry too much about LCDs at the time. That really came, you know, the commonality of LCDs on desktops definitely came more after we had done kind of the shift to more kind of frequency domain DCT based transformations that other codecs also used. So that was a different era, a different style of compression by the time that LCDs were far more common.
When did you first hear about the Sega Saturn? Were you aware of it when they first announced that from the Genesis, or was it something that you heard of when Sega contacted you?
I joined Duck after the initial. So I think in the first days when I first joined the company, I think we already had the big Sophia box, and you know, it kind of had been unpacked in the Manhattan office, and everyone's like kind of staring at it, being like, "Well, geez, now what do we do?" And I was the crazy one, was like, yeah, give it to me, I'll figure it out. So I had I dove right into that after it was, you know, sort of a foregone conclusion we were doing it. I hadn't been a super active gamer at that point. I'd done more sort of audio stuff and music stuff, and then I was doing like process automation, and I was more a kind of, you know, casual gamer at that point, at that instant. So if you asked me, you know, 32X versus, you know, Master System versus, you know, that kind of thing, at that point, it wasn't, I wasn't as plugged into it. I was an Atari ST programmer, actually. The Atari ST was my big platform. So I did a lot of gaming on that. And that's how I got to know Dan Miller, who was the CTO of Duck at that point. You know, kind of, I guess he was president and CTO, and Stan Martyr was our CEO. So they were the kind of co-chieftain of the company. So yeah, I early on, it was, you know, we were going to do it, and I was like, all right, this is mine. I want to do this.
You just knew of it as the Sophia at first, right? It wasn't like,
well, I knew it was the Saturn. It is, you know, we had heard code names about, you know, the other platforms, the Neptune and, you know, different things. You know, it had that wonderful CD, the CD sitting on top of it. So we knew, you know, it was a Sega box, and it had, you know, logos and stuff on it, you know, just printed on these wonderful big gray or beige metal things. You know, Sophia, we knew it was the Saturn.
You mentioned, you know, obviously being heavily involved with Sega in that time, and you know, you'd mentioned that you'd done a lot of visits over to Sega of Japan, and so we're just curious, what was that experience like? And I'm asking because us fans, you know, the guys that don't have any inside track, it always seemed that there was discord between the American and Japanese offices. And did you get any sense of that at all? Like, what was your firsthand impression during those visits?
Ooh, that's a good one. They definitely were two different, I don't want to say two different companies, but, you know, two different offices. There was a tremendous amount of respect back and forth between each one, but they, you know, had different things that they focused on. And, you know, I wouldn't say, you know, it was discord or, you know, it's like friendly competition, you know, maybe sort of things. You know, they had different markets, and they knew there were, you know, different types of games appeal to the Japanese market than the US market and so on. But, you know, it was very interesting. I mean, I dove into Japanese culture at the time and stuff, and it was really interesting because literally the boxes came to us with just lots of manuals that were all in Japanese. There wasn't a lot, clearly this was developed, the hardware was developed in Tokyo, and that was a challenge. And I remember talking to some of the folks at Sega of America saying, oh yeah, I got the disc streaming at, I'm getting the real 32X out of it. And they're like, what? How are you doing that? How's that? Yeah, we didn't think that was possible. I'm like, well, I went this, kind of dove in and just hacked at it. Eventually I did learn some Japanese. I actually took 2 semesters of Japanese at the time, and there's some great resources I had, and I sort of got adopted by a bunch of the people at developer technical support, and they helped, and it was fantastic. I still have some books and stuff that they gave me to help in my Japanese and translations and stuff. It was really it was a really, really close relationship. So I love the people at Sega of America as well. Different types of relationships.
How did you physically communicate with these folks down there? But I mean, obviously, so you took some Japanese. Did you ever get to a point where you were fluent, or at least able to carry on a conversation with folks down there?
Yeah, I mean, they're obviously their English was generally way better than my Japanese. I'm not going to pretend that I was really fluent. I got to the point where I could carry on a conversation with a stranger on a bus. So that was pretty good. A funny story. I remember going and, telling people at a meeting and they said, that just everyone starts laughing after I told them, yeah, I just arrived and I took the plane and why is everyone laughing? And they said, well, you just arrived by bicycle. And I was like, whoops, but it was really, it was great, because they were, and that was something, for me, that was a real personal growth opportunity, because I found that I was more accepted by them and got access to things because I was very, very open to Japanese culture. And the funniest joke, or one of the funny jokes, was like, I forget who said it, but someone from SOJ said, Eric, if only you had been born in Japan, you'd be Japanese. Obviously anyone born in Japan would have been Japanese, but it was more, they meant that sort of my style of, trying to listen and understand and all that was very much a compliment. I, just like to kind of, I really enjoyed everything about it, culture and the people. And I just dove into it.
Do you have any funny or interesting stories from down there? Like, for example, did you ever, turn the corner and bump into Yu Suzuki and spill your coffee on him, or anything crazy like that?
Fortunately, no. I never spilled coffee on him or anything like that. I remember, and this isn't so much a funny story, but it's a very interesting one. I remember, and I guess this is more a Dreamcast story than a Saturn story, but I'll share it anyway. I remember we had been working on a new version of TrueMotion. It's TrueMotion 2, and a different team, some different folks at Duck or On2, I forget if we were already On2 at the time, had been working on it. It was definitely more CPU intensive, and it was more optimized for running on a PC. And the folks at Sega, we're going to show it on the Dreamcast, and we wanted to make it work there. And I had to go and show it, and we're showing it on the PC and the performance on there. And they're like, well, we've looked at the performance on here. We know it's not going to work. It's just not going to perform adequately, or on the Dreamcast. It's just, we're not going to have the horsepower that you're demonstrating on right now. How can we know that this is going to work? And I just said, well, I'm promising you it will. And we will do whatever it takes to make it work. And from that, TM2X was born. Again, was floored, thankfully, at the trust they put in me at that point to just say, no, I'm going to you have my personal assurance that this is going to happen. And then I came back to New York after saying, listen, guys, this is, there was my prediction. I told you this is going to happen. And so went back to the drawing board on a lot of stuff, or, dusted off a lot of things. We're like, no, we could do it. So that's, in retrospect, it's a lot funnier. It's a funnier story than it was at the time. I was standing in front of a whole bunch of people who were saying, like, we know this isn't going to work. How are you going to make it work? And I was saying, ooh, boy.
Of course, then there's the pressure to make it work.
Yeah. Oh, wait, I have a great funny story. If you want just a straight up funny story. One of the first times I was visiting in Japan, they took us out to dinner, the DTS folks, and they took us to this German restaurant. So, because they wanted us, they were worried about us eating too much weird stuff or something like that. And at one point, so we're having like steak or something at this German restaurant, for sausages. I forget what it was. And I just start, typical American, I'm just, cutting up sausage or whatever, kind of like, and everyone just like this hush falls over the crowd. And I'm like, what happened? And they're like, are you a chef? And I'm like, no. It's like, well, how do you use the knife so well? And I just said,
wow.
I just, it was just really because and maybe, things do change culturally and so on. The typical, especially in more, in a more, dinner scenario where you don't use knives that much at the table. It's much more, you're more familiar with things being prepared in such a way that they're not designed. You're used to using, the chopsticks and utensils and things, and it's not so. Just going to town with a sharp knife on your meal is kind of unusual. And I said, oh no, I'm just I'm good. And the funniest part of the story was they then said, well, could you cut our food for us? So I went and I said, sure. And I helped people cut up their
That's
food.
Fantastic.
So it was great. I think kind of sealed the friendship at that point. Because we were just really open about things. It's kind of like, this is, I remember, all sorts of fun stories about, like, oh, we like the crispy parts of the shrimp, they like the shells, if you're familiar, again, these large, super giant shrimp being served in restaurants. And of course, us Americans would want the nice soft belly of the shrimp sort of thing. And the more Eastern palate is to have, nice crispy, crunchy, head of the shrimp. And we're like, okay, you can have all the heads and I'll have all the tails. And, it all worked out. So
wow.
I'm all about those shrimp heads.
Yeah, no, I eventually learned to be like, it's different. They, for quite a while, I had this reputation. They would just like say, okay, where are we going to take Eric to like try to stress him out over the food? And so I had everything. We would just do everything.
I mean, obviously the Saturn wasn't doing super well in the market here. Was there a sense of that in the American office? Like, were the folks there super passionate about gaming, or was it more just, focused on the business?
Well, there was the launch. You have to, every Saturn conversation, you got to at some point acknowledge the US launch. And I think that, I remember I forget what conference, I think it was a developers conference I was at where they announced it. I was at that conference, and just jaws dropped when it was like, okay, it's gonna be, everyone was excited to try to beat Sony to the punch, but, as developers, and we're like, oh my God, how could you not have warned us? Are we ready? Or what's going to be out there? And the launch stung for quite a while. I think, Sony's launch in the US just went a lot better. and that was tough. And I think there were some fantastic games, and games that were, that came from SOJ that did tremendously well, and, beautiful, gorgeous. One of my favorite games, they didn't use TrueMotion, but I'm a huge Panzer Dragoon fan. So the games were there, the technology were there. It was, excuse me, it was a challenge to program on the Saturn, certainly. It's tough to say why didn't it do as well in the States. It was a little more cutthroat, and I think Sony kind of focused on things here, and the developers, I think, found the PlayStation a little bit easier to develop for, and it's tough.
Going to be getting the remake of Panzer Dragoon?
I am waiting with bated breath. When I heard about that, I was just like, okay, if there was ever a reason to be thankful of that, my family got me a Switch for Christmas. That was it. I'm super, I just, after one of the times, dusting off my Saturn after a long time, the first thing I did was like, okay, I'm going to play Panzer Dragoon and just work through it again. Huge fan of that.
Yeah, definitely. We'll have to get you on here when we do a stream of that and play through a little bit.
Do Do you have any odd, neat, or unusual Sega hardware or software from back in the day?
I do, as a matter of fact. I haven't seen this show up much. I'm sure they're probably still out there. I have the IR remote wireless controllers. And so there's an adapter you plug in the front. I don't know how many people, maybe everybody has them. I don't know, but I haven't seen them too often. And I was a big fan of these, so you could, do these, have the wireless controllers. I don't know, are they odd or rare? I don't know. You guys tell me. You know better nowadays, I guess.
Yeah, they are getting pretty obscure. Those I have a receiver and a single controller from Japan, and then I've got the dual controller and receiver from Europe. So I've got like one of each of the setups. And I'll tell you, man, the European ones, the black casing versions, those are pretty pricey these days.
So yeah, that's let's see, what other obscure things. I have a whole, I don't know, not a stack, I'll say, but when Virtua Fighter 2 came out, there was a comic that was done, and I have a bunch of those. So I've got bunches of memorabilia. I used to get Christmas cards from folks both in SOA and SOJ that I've held on to and stuff like that. I've some conference, some fans and things, and all sorts of memorabilia. Hardware wise, still have my developer kits and stuff. I'm sure that's fairly rare at this point. I'd have a hard time parting with that. But consumer wise, I think that the light gun, it's that and the wireless controllers, some Dreamcast stuff. I had one of it's a Godzilla VMU, visual memory unit. So I got some things for that, which are unusual. So lots of little fun things.
That's really cool though. You've been playing a lot of you play a lot of light gun games?
I can't say a lot. House of the Dead was just one of my favorite. I love House of the Dead. I'm big, the classic sort of thing. I started working through. Kay, you got me back hooked into it, and I haven't looked at it in a while. One of my another light gun game. We'd have to come back to that one. But yeah, one of my favorites was, I know we played way too much House of the Dead when we got the light gun at the time. So it's just both the nostalgia, because that had been the game that we played it a lot.
No, that's the game I played when I was a kid as well. House of the Dead 2 when that came to Dreamcast.
Yeah,
played a ton of that. That was the party game. Have friends come over and switch out every time someone died.
Can you just tell us real quick, what was Kenji Eno like? I mean, I know he's no longer with us, and we sort of have this idea that he was super passionate, and really just kind of did things his own way. What was the guy like? What was it like working with Warp?
I met with him in person, I want to say maybe just 2 times, but he was everything you'd expect him to be. It was definitely passionate about things, a presence in a room, he's another one of these people who okay, no compromise. How do we make this fantastic? And, you're just thrilled to be part of the project, sort of thing. He's one of those kind of larger than life kind of folks. So yeah, sort of exactly like you'd picture it. Really, really nice guy. Don't think he spoke much English, to tell you the truth.
To score Enemy Zero, he really wanted to get Michael Nyman on board to do to do a piano piece for it. And there's an interesting story about how he essentially took Michael Nyman to a hotel room and just wouldn't let him go. And he just kept asking him over and over gotta score this game. We really want you to do it. And eventually Michael Nyman just said, yes, okay, fine, I'll do it, because he just wanted to get out of there. And so that's just the intensity of Kenji Eno that we're aware of. So it's neat to hear it from somebody who's met with him that, yeah, that's, every bit of that is probably true, and, that he was sort of a larger-than-life character.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, even I remember before meeting him, it was just the moment that we knew he wanted TrueMotion for the game was everyone's like, oh, this is fantastic, you're going to get to work with it. It's because of course I hadn't met him yet, or, didn't really know him. It wasn't, the lore out there about the thing, but certainly swirling around was just wait, it's going to be fantastic. And it lived, certainly lived up to it. It's really great.
How did you feel that TrueMotion did on the Saturn compared to other consoles, or even like the Dreamcast, for example?
As far as consoles, the Saturn was really, I think we sort of peaked, and I guess we peaked early on. I mean, we never quite got the usage, the Dreamcast as much. The number of games we were involved in there wasn't nearly as much. At that point, I think, Sega, there was the MDEC, the codec that had been developed by CRI, which was, had an even closer relationship with Sega than we did. They were part of the same, holding companies. And I knew that, it's funny, they were our main competition, but I literally exchanged greeting cards with them. And so I no ill will whatsoever. But they did a really phenomenal job in creating this sort of hybrid MPEG for the Dreamcast that got more use. And it was really, they just had that much more of a closer relationship with the hardware and folks over there that was harder for TrueMotion to kind of crack at that point. I think, if the time scales had been different and we had been like further along with our VP3 development when the Dreamcast happened, I think we were pivoting at that point between different technologies and better at, more MPEG-like bit rates, and the timing just wasn't quite right there. And we had, really started focusing on the internet as the Dreamcast came out, which to me was sort of a, it was a kick in the gut a little bit, but it was tough making that transition. And there was a lot going on. There's the Katana, there's, the Dreamcast in the US. And I'm sure you've heard all the stories about the SOA version versus the SOJ version and so on, trying to, figure out what version, where we were running our code and so on and so forth, which was challenging. But the Saturn was really, for me, the platform with the most adoption outside of, eventually the PC and kind of where things went after that. I actually had done a PlayStation, an original PlayStation version of TrueMotion. And there it was kind of even harder because the MDEC that, Sony had that kind of built-in JPEG decoder block in the PlayStation. That was a tough nut to crack for a software-only codec. And I had done a version that I prototyped on some Silicon Graphics hardware because it was similar to what Nintendo had in the, was it the GameCube or?
I think they're using that in the N64 days for the SGI machines.
Yeah, that was the one. Yeah, right. GameCube was after the 64, right? Or am I missing? Yeah. So that I had done something that was close to, because we were hoping to do a lot more with developers who were going to work on one system and port across. There's actually, Sega was working on a game called Sacred Pools. I don't know, have any of you heard about Sacred Pools? It made a big, pardon the pun, big splash at E3. It was a kind of a pet project of one of the higher ups at Sega of America, and it was going to be cross-platform. It was going to be, the guys at Code Monkeys were developing it. It was going to be across, at least on the Saturn and the PlayStation, and it just never, it sucked up lots of resources, and there was lots of parties and promotion and things, and it just sort of never happened. But that was one of the big reasons that I had to positively get a PlayStation version of TrueMotion going. Somewhere out there, there's a prototype of Sacred Pools running on a PlayStation playing TrueMotion.
Hopefully we'll be able to find that one of these days.
I don't know. It might be in a dump somewhere in England or something, but it's, who knows?
We're hoping to find some of those things. I mean, we're still holding on hope for that Virtual Fighter RPG.
Yeah, I got to drop back into what happened with all the Shenmue stuff and Virtual Fighter RPG, and fell behind on all that stuff.
Yeah, no, I was going to ask if you knew because they made a version on Saturn, if they used any of the TrueMotion for that, because I know Sega was using a lot of that, the TrueMotion codecs for their for a lot of their games. So I'm sure if maybe he approached you for that.
They really, really, I mean, this is definitely, a passion project, sort of thing. I mean, the history of it, and certainly as much of it as possible was going to be in-game engine. The idea was to avoid FMV as much as possible. They wanted to make it, super, super seamless and just, if I recall correctly, I think we had done some tests. I seem to recall some segments that I don't know where they are these days. I don't think I have them, but I think they might have been on a hard drive somewhere down in Manhattan, and they're gone by now.
It's kind of one of the holy grails of the Saturn preservation and fan groups, is to find anybody who has any knowledge of an actual compiled program for Virtua Fighter RPG / Shenmue running on the Saturn. Just recently, like 2 days ago, I found out about the Sega Extreme Discord channel. And I dropped into the development place first and saw what they had been talking about in there was directly related to TrueMotion, and trying to see if there was the possibility of having a compiled Saturn executable where you could drop a bunch of AVIs onto the disk and just have the TrueMotion codec playing them, decoding them. What's your thought process on that, since you're now in that Discord?
I know that exists. The binary for that exists because I wrote it. Basically, I for our development purposes, I made a executable that would just look at whatever files you put on the disk, and it would play them. And so I know those exist. So that I might be able to unearth in a relatively painless fashion. Nothing's going to happen by tomorrow or next week or things. I'm transitioning from one job to the next and preparing syllabi and all sorts of stuff for the fall. So you have to bear with me. And I'm a million projects deep in lots of things. My eyes are always bigger than my stomach, so to speak.
Yeah, well, the community in general, I saw the reaction, to your appearance, and they're pretty happy to see your input. Have you programmed any other code for the Saturn that no one knows about?
Code that no one knows about? Certainly that, let's see, there was one particular demo that at the time people saw, but the general community you probably haven't seen. And we demoed it as a thing called Ted the Head, which was what we called the demo. And we had done this later on in development. Sega of Japan created the SGL, the Sega Graphics Language, or Sega Graphics Library. I don't know how. I'm sure the community, hopefully people are on that one. Is basically they wanted to create, make it easier to do 3D on the Saturn, and so they created these wonderful libraries that were optimizing for VP1 and so on. And there was a version that was which character was it? Just walking through a space, kind of just animated wonderfully at 60 frames per second, sort of thing. And we created a texture map of an actor talking about TrueMotion, and we compressed that and did it in such a way that we were able to texture map that to the head of the character and stream from the CD while the other stuff was all going on. So it was really kind of tightly integrated with the engine and the update, and everything happened seamlessly. So outside of developers conferences, you would have never really seen that. And that was kind of one cool demo that I wish some of that showed up more, that sort of thing where people were using FMV in unusual ways, that kind of more complemented the 3D part as opposed to being a substitute for it, and vice versa.
I was curious what your sort of opinion on the extended effort on game preservation is nowadays.
Well, like I said, in my current job, I'm worried about that exact same thing in other ways. What we're doing over there is we're actually using a special disc that was created called the M disc, which is a DVD format. They actually have a Blu-ray version of it now as well. They're called the M disc, Millennium disc. They're supposed to last 1,000 years and be no bit rot and no oxygen can get in and so on. It's a non-organic dye and all this kind of great stuff. Thankfully, on the Sega Saturn and so on, a lot of these other platforms, emulation is more of a viable thing for a lot of people. And in a way, it encourages people to also for the hardware, because there is you can kind of concentrate on one and they complement each other well. But it is challenging, and I'm certainly encouraged to see that happen. It's nice that people are playing games. I'm even playing some games that I'd never played at the time, thanks to the efforts of folks like you and who are able to kind of pass the torch from generation to generation. So my hat is very much off to the community. I'm very happy it's out there doing that sort of thing. I actually, even there's a bunch of Atari ST. It was through Atari ST emulation preserved some of the music software I wrote back in the 80s, and that's also just in there. I have my original ST as well, and it still works. But preservation is a tough thing. Hardware doesn't live forever. Capacitors do leak, and CDs do rot, and it's unfortunate. It is very, very unfortunate.
Yeah, I think one of the big things is just the legal aspect as well. I mean, you see all the thing in the news for Nintendo suing these guys for distributing these games and all that, and I know that's really a tough topic balancing those. I know me and Kay talked a lot about it. I was curious what your opinions on balancing that legal aspect with the, the preservation aspect.
It's tricky. It's definitely tricky. The challenge, as the folks like Nintendo and the IP holders, they're always concerned. It's the Disney effect of you have to be really, really careful about your IP, because if any of it gets out in the public domain, then suddenly it opens the doors to suddenly you don't own the rights to Mickey Mouse anymore. I can respect that, but it is a shame to potentially lose stuff as well. We shifted, we started off being very, very, very proprietary at On2 or at Duck. We were all about the, our IP and so on, and went through a big shift. Obviously now with the Google version, it's all just open source and it's freely available, royalty free and so on. So thanks to, a company that took the exact opposite. They provide their software for free. That's a way to give things a life of their own. So that's really, it is a balancing act to get stuff out there. I mean, MAME has been facing that problem for a long time, and obviously it still exists. And I think it's one thing to preserve things, it's another one to distribute. And, you need a certain amount of distribution to preserve beyond, one person with the ultimate library of things. But you also don't want to see, people exploiting it in ways that would anger the original authors and things like that. It's tricky. I don't have a good answer for that one. Wish I did.
It's just a shame, though. I mean, hopefully one day we'll be able to figure out some way to balance it.
Well, thankfully, I think you do, you have a leg to stand on, saying, well, I bought this thing once upon a time. I don't want it to, I bought a license that should last. So therefore, I should be able to back it up and so on.
One of the big aspects of, modern day retro gaming is that, the cost of some of these games have skyrocketed over the last 10 or 20 years with we see some companies will go ahead and put a collection together. We see that a lot with Activision and Midway putting out, collections of games from the past, but it's not always possible to port games to new consoles or other platforms simply because the source code or assets have been lost. So this is something that keeps coming up with, guests that we speak with at SHIRO here, is the feeling about emulating a game that's not available in the first, party market, going in and just going to a retail shop because the system's been, out of production for 20 years versus being forced to pay $500 for a copy of Panzer Dragoon Saga when we know that there's a limited number of them out there and its popularity has caused its value to rise in the secondhand market. So do you have thoughts about that, that juxtaposition of being able to experience a game regardless, or does an end user have to go out and purchase it on the secondhand market?
I have this lofty, weird position of my own where I don't know, especially, I mean, on the Saturn, I was lucky enough to sort of be provided, and always the rule was I could get any Saturn game, or I was entitled to play any Saturn game I wanted to. It sounds weird, but it was kind of the case. So today, if I would have no problem playing a backup because that was my arrangement directly with sort of Sega, and that's a weird position to be in. Certainly, any TrueMotion game, I would have no qualms about playing a backup of it because that was my deal. However, certainly it's tough with digital media in general. It's should everyone be allowed to appreciate the Mona Lisa, even though you don't own a copy of it? I'm okay with people using software that I wrote years and years and years ago and not paying me for it. There's other software out there that's been released and open sourced and things like that.
It's definitely tricky because I think everyone here and probably everyone in the community, if they had an opportunity to buy these games on a first-party market and give their money to Sega, they'd be more than gladly to give it to them. But it's realistically, I don't think they're going to be printing, say, Saturn games anymore, even if they wanted to at some point.
Well, not with that attitude, Pat.
It's funny because you do see that same issue in a lot of different things. It's the collectible. It's a collectible thing in general. I mean, side note, I'm also a very avid Lego collector and Lego aficionado, I guess. And there are certain Lego sets that were made at one point, and if you buy the original version, new in box, sealed, versus something that's built with at least, this is varying degrees of, I bought a version that, someone else, you can buy a $1,500 Lego train set that was originally sold for $150. So from the collector point of view, I think that's fantastic. If people want to pay those sorts of things for the original, to have in their hands something that came off of that assembly line or that manufacturing line, and its scarcity has increased its value, that's fine. That's great. People hoarding stuff, I would have a problem with. If you're creating artificial scarcity in a market just because you want to exploit that, that's not too great. But digital is tough, because you can make infinite, you can make copies of things, and you're not exploiting. I don't think you're necessarily devaluing the original because it's not. It is a copy. If I look at the Mona Lisa in a book, I know it's. I can appreciate the Mona Lisa and still respect the fact that there's somebody owns control or whatever, to an original artwork. That's fine as well. So deep down, I can respect both. It's great for people to be able to experience those things, but I think there are ways that the collector community can still feel that, you've got something exclusive and you should feel good about that. And, you have to balance that. It's, there are ways for both things to live side by side. Yeah. You can get a Hyundai that looks a lot like an Aston Martin, or you can get a real Aston Martin.
What are your favorite Saturn games as a gamer?
Panzer Dragoon, immediately I have to say Panzer Dragoon, just because the gameplay, the environment, the music. I'm a big fan of, audio in a game. I mean, maybe that's one of the reasons that I also like, Kenji Ino's approach to things, and sound was just such an important. I mean, if you look at the real sound games, game without any images, sort of thing. So games that really did that, like in Panzer Dragoon, just everything about that was well done. I just created such an immersive experience. I love that game. The immediacy of, all the AM2 games, just love the arcade kind of stuff as well. Those would be the ones, and House of the Dead. I'm also a huge survival horror kind of fan, so I'm love that sort of thing as well. So House of the Dead kind of scratches a lot of itches for me. Is that me?
Are you a big Resident Evil guy?
I'm not current on it. I played through Resident Evil certainly on the original PlayStation, and the master of unlocking things and all that sort of wonderful stuff. So yeah, I'm a big fan of Resident Evil. I have to catch up though. I haven't seen all the latest and greatest versions.
Yeah, Peter just played that for the first time recently.
Original?
Yeah.
Oh, it's classic. It's great. It is great. One of my favorite games going way back, and originally I played it through on the PlayStation, the original PlayStation, was Warp's other game. Was it M?
D.
Yes, D. D was phenomenal. Love that as well. The environment, the piano, the score, everything about it was really, really great. I love those, just those really, really immersive games. Newer games, like I really got into for a while, Amnesia. I love this, the games that really draw you in like that. They aren't necessarily all action and, jump scare kind of things, but that's just like you're sitting there like, oh my God, draws you into it.
The final two questions we have. First off, are there any projects that you are working on that you'd like to talk about?
Well, I'm just going to put a plug out there for it's not so much a project, but the big transition that I'm going through right now in terms of switching from senior research engineer over to our gaming simulation art and science program at RPI. So a big plug for Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. We are one of the top programs for game design and critical game theory and so on. It's kind of consistently ranked high, and I'm super, super excited to be part of that program now and be working with new students on different things. So yeah, it's not a particular game project, but I will mention, and my son and I, that's how crazy this now is. I remember sitting on my desk with, kind of babysitting my son as an infant, kind of keep him under control while I was, one man show at, my little satellite office that I was still up here. And he and I are starting to actually collaborate on some games, which is exciting. He is now, of course, he lives in Boston. He has a master's in data analytics and is doing quite well, and so on. So, but we're going to try to do with some friends. We're gonna work our way up from some different things, and so you have to keep an eye out for that. Who knows if we start a little independent thing? We'll see.
We kind of touched base on this with specifically TrueMotion, but I wanted to ask, were there any beta versions, tech demos, or unreleased items or source code that you've been privy to that doesn't fall under an NDA that you would be willing to share with the community in any fashion?
I'll have to dig through it. I'm sure I have stuff. I'm sure I've lots of discs that say confidential for your eyes only. So I'll have to see what the status of all that kind of stuff is. But I'm personally amenable to things, and I can reach out. I keep in touch with some folks who might be able to make me feel better about one way or another where that goes, or maybe you didn't get it from me. Maybe it just showed up somewhere. I don't know. You've got lots of friends out there.
Today's obscure game in the cast is going to be The Horde on the Saturn, originally released on the 3DO and MS-DOS in 1994. And Sega Saturn in Europe in 1995 and North America in 97.
The idea with the Horde is basically you play this squire. This it starts off with this lots of FMV in it, and it was high production value at the time. Kirk Cameron of which I forget which sitcom he was in. He was the character, the lead role, Chauncey, who is this kind of squire who saves the king from choking on a piece of mutton or something like that, and as a favor, he says, "Oh, okay, I'm going to grant you. You're now Sir Chauncey, and you're going to be granted this land in the kingdom." And so your role then is to develop this land, and so you have sort of a civilization kind of thing going on, and the challenge, of course, is that you never get the prime spots. Yours, it's like some kind of swampland or something like that. And there's always the Horde. And the Horde are sort of these kind of gremlin-ish characters that are going to do their best to eat all of they particularly love cows. So you're going to eat your cows and your villagers, and they can just come in and do their best to destroy everything. And the better that you do, you eventually build castles and you create this wonderfully productive regions. And as you move along, you get granted more lands and so on, much to the chagrin of the king's right-hand man. And I don't want to get too spoiler in all this, but so you're all constantly rewarded with new FMVs and little cut sequences and come in and little animations of the Hordelings, as they were called, doing different goofy things and newscasts and trying to trick you into doing stuff. And so this top-down strategy planning, so city building, defend the castle sort of thing, being attacked by this horde all the time. And it's a lot of fun. It's definitely one that's out there. It's like you said, it's pretty obscure in that you wouldn't think of it immediately. I wouldn't even when I think of it, I think of the 3DO version, which is the first version that we did. But there was the Saturn version of it.
All right, guys, thank you for listening to the podcast, and remember,
Sega Saturn SHIRO Shin Hatsubai.
I have one last request. We normally close out each show that we do with at least one person, if not everybody, one after the other, saying you must
Sega.
play Sega Saturn. Would you be
Oh.
willing to do that for us?
So what? So specifically say you must play Sega Saturn.
Yeah, it's kind of like, because that's Sega
Is that
Saturn
your-
Shiro means
Sega Saturn Shinhatsubai. It's always like, available now. And that's always the one we always heard. And on Japanese TV, it was always Sega Saturn Shinhatsubai. And we're like, what does that mean? What does that mean? It's like, Saturn available now.
That's awesome. I love it.
Or I could say Sega Saturn Shiro Shinhatsubai.
That's it. That's it right there. We got it.